I spent 28 years of my life on my feet on concrete floors, slinging scrambled eggs and meatloaf behind a hospital cafeteria line, and I do not regret a single shift. Because those shifts bought me something my brother Mark could never understand. They bought me a paid-off bungalow on a quiet street, where the maples drop leaves on my front walk every October. They bought me the right to go to bed at night knowing that no bank could put a padlock on my front door. Every penny of that $230,000 was mine. I earned it at $14, $50 an hour, then $16, $80, then $19, $25. I saved it through foot surgery, through a divorce that cost me my savings account, through the long, slow grind of watching other people retire while I kept scooping mashed potatoes. And then I got sick. The first time I felt the lump, I was standing in the walk-in freezer doing inventory, counting boxes of frozen peas. I remember the exact box, July 14th. I had my hand on a case of frozen carrots and I felt this hard little marble under my armpit. I did not cry, I did not panic. I simply finished my count, clocked out, and drove myself to urgent care. That was just how I operated. You handle the problem in front of you. You do not waste energy on the problems you cannot see yet. The cancer diagnosis came 3 weeks later. Stage 2 breast cancer, aggressive but treatable. My oncologist, Dr. Reyes, said I had a real shot if we moved fast. 6 months of chemotherapy, then surgery, then radiation. She said I would need help. She said I would need someone to drive me to appointments, manage my bills, handle my affairs while my body was busy fighting for its life. I did not have a husband anymore. I did not have children. What I had was a brother. Mark was 4 years younger than me and he had spent his entire life being the family golden child. My mother used to say that Mark had big dreams and I had steady hands. What that meant in practice was that I went to work at 5 a.m., while Mark borrowed money from my parents to open a catering hall on Long Island called Mark's Grand Ballroom. The name was grandiose. The business was not. He had been running that place for 15 years and I had never once seen him turn a profit. But he drove a leased Mercedes and wore monogrammed shirts and talked about expansion opportunities, while his wife Tanya redecorated their McMansion every 2 years with money that seemed to come from nowhere. So when I got sick, I did what the doctors told me to do. I named Mark as my power of attorney. It was supposed to be temporary. 6 months, maybe 7. Enough time for me to get through chemo without having to worry about whether I had paid the water bill. I had known Mark for 56 years. I did not trust him with my heart, but I trusted him with my mailbox. That was my mistake. The first thing I did after the diagnosis was sit down at my kitchen table and write out a list of instructions for Mark. It was 3 pages long. Pay the mortgage, which was already down to 0, so just keep the account open for the escrow on property taxes. Pay the electric bill from my checking account. Water the African violet on the windowsill. Do not touch my retirement account. Do not touch my savings. Do not touch the deed to the house. I put that list in a manila envelope and handed it to him at my kitchen table. He looked at the list, then he looked at me and he said, "Don't worry, sis, I got you." Tanya was standing behind him, and she smiled. I remember that smile. It was the smile of a woman who had just found a loose brick in the wall of a bank vault. The house was my anchor. I had paid it off 6 years earlier, right after my divorce from Raja. Raja had never contributed a dime to the mortgage, but he had tried to claim half the equity anyway. That was its own nightmare. I had fought him in court for 2 years and I had won. The house was mine, free and clear, with my name and only my name on the deed. I had a small savings account with $48,000 in it. I had a modest pension from the hospital. I had Social Security coming in a few years. That was it. That was my whole life and it was enough. For the first few months of treatment I was too sick to notice anything. Chemo flattened me. I lost my hair, lost my appetite, lost whole days to sleep and nausea and the fog of medication. Mark would stop by, check the mail, bring me soup from the deli. Tanya would call and ask how I was feeling. I thought they were being kind. I thought family was finally showing up. Then my mother died. She passed on a Tuesday morning 3 months into my treatment. It was not a shock. She had been declining for years, congestive heart failure, diabetes, the slow unwinding of a body that had given up. But still it was my mother. I was too weak to attend the funeral. I watched it on a live stream from my bed, a grainy feed of my mother's casket being lowered into the ground, while a priest I had never met said words I could not hear. Mark went, of course. He gave the eulogy. He talked about my mother's generosity of spirit while I sat alone in my house and wondered if I would be next. That was when the vultures really started to circle. The day after the funeral, Mark and Tanya showed up at my house with a binder full of documents. Tanya was wearing a designer dress and heels, which was odd for a Tuesday afternoon. She set the binder down on my kitchen table and said, "We need to talk about your finances, sweetie. Now that Mom is gone, we have to make sure everything is in order." Mark stood behind her nodding. I was sitting in my recliner, wrapped in a blanket, too tired to argue. I said, "What finances? The house is paid off, my bills are on autopay." And Tanya said, "That's exactly the problem. You need someone to manage your affairs properly. We want to help." They wanted me to sign a new power of attorney. A durable one, they called it. One that would give Mark complete control over my bank accounts, my property, my medical decisions, everything. I said I would think about it. Tanya's face tightened just for a second, but then she smiled and said, "Of course, take your time, we're just trying to protect you." They left the binder on my table. I was too sick to read it. The next day, Mark came back alone. He said, "Listen, I need you to sign this paperwork so I can pay your property taxes from your account. The county is going to put a lien on the house if we don't act fast." I was in the middle of a chemo crash, shaking under my blanket, barely able to hold a pen. I signed. I did not read what I was signing, I just signed. That was the worst mistake of my life. A month later, I found a foreclosure notice taped to my front door. I was still weak, still bald, still fighting through radiation, but I stood there on my front porch and read that piece of paper 4 times. It said my house was being foreclosed on. It said I owed $190,000 on a reverse mortgage that I had apparently taken out 3 weeks earlier. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the paper. I called the bank, and the bank confirmed it. There was a reverse mortgage on my property, taken out in my name, with Mark as the designated representative under power of attorney. The loan proceeds had been deposited into a checking account that I had never seen before, and according to the bank, that account was already empty. I called Mark. He did not answer. I called Tanya. She did not answer. I called the catering hall. A recorded message said the number had been temporarily disconnected. I sat down on my front steps and I did the math in my head. $190,000. That was how much Mark's grand ballroom owed to its vendors, its landlord, its creditors. That was the amount that had been drained out of my house and poured into his failing business. And the bank was coming to take my home. That was the moment I stopped being a victim and started being a predator. The first thing I did was go back inside and open the binder that Tanya had left on my table. I read every page, slowly, carefully, and I found something incredible. The power of attorney that Mark had used to take out the reverse mortgage was not the same one I had signed on chemo brain. It was a new document, with my signature forged at the bottom. But here is the thing about forgery. It only works if the person being forged is not alive to dispute it. I was very much alive. And I had a copy of the original power of attorney that I had actually signed, the one that explicitly stated Mark could only pay bills from my checking account. The new document was dated 3 weeks after my original, and it gave Mark full and unlimited authority over all my assets. It also had a notary stamp from a woman named Patricia M. Vance. I had never met anyone named Patricia M. Vance in my life. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that family who steals from you is not family at all, and that competency is the best revenge. Now let's get back to what happened next. I did not call the police right away. I did not call a lawyer right away. I called the county clerk's office and asked for a copy of the notary public registry. It took me 20 minutes on hold, but I got what I needed. There was no Patricia M. Vance registered in the state of New York. The notary stamp on Mark's document was fake. The notary seal number was invalid. The document was legally worthless, but the bank did not know that. The bank had a signed mortgage document, a notarized power of attorney, and a legal claim on my house. I needed to dismantle Mark's fraud piece by piece, and I needed to do it while pretending to be too sick and too weak to understand what was happening, so I called Mark. I left a voicemail and I made my voice sound shaky and confused. I said, "Mark, I got some paper from the bank. It says something about a mortgage. Can you come over and explain it to me? I don't understand. I'm scared." That was the first lie I told them. I was not scared. I was furious, but they could not know that. Mark called me back an hour later and his voice was so smooth it made my skin crawl. "Don't worry about that, sis," he said. "The bank made a mistake. I'll take care of it. You just focus on getting better." He said he would come by the next day to sort things out. I hung up the phone and I started planning. The next morning I didn't look like a woman who had discovered a $190,000 fraud. I looked like a woman who couldn't remember what day it was. I wrapped myself in my blanket, I didn't put on my wig, and I sat in my recliner with a cup of cold tea. When Mark and Tanya walked in, they saw exactly what they wanted to see, a sick, weak, frightened woman who needed to be managed. We have some paperwork for you to sign, Tanya said, and she pulled a thick stack of documents out of her designer bag. These are just some forms to clear up the bank error, nothing to worry about, it's just technical stuff. She set the papers down on the table in front of me and handed me a pen. I looked at the papers. They were not about clearing up a bank error. They were about transferring the deed to my house over to Mark. They were about giving him full ownership of my property, free and clear, in exchange for assuming responsibility for the reverse mortgage. It was a theft in broad daylight, dressed up as a helping hand. I looked up at Tanya with my best confused expression and said, I don't understand, the house is mine. Why would I give it to Mark? And Tanya said, because the bank made a terrible mistake, honey, and now the house has a big debt on it. Mark can absorb that debt for you, he's doing you a favor, you don't want to lose your home, do you? Mark knelt down next to my chair and took my hand. His skin was clammy. He said, I'm trying to save you, sis, just sign the papers, trust me. I signed nothing. I said I need to think about it. My head is so foggy. Can we do it tomorrow? Tanya's left eye twitched just for a second and I knew I had found the crack in her armor. She was desperate, they both were. The bank must have been calling them every day asking where the mortgage payments were. The creditors from the catering hall must have been circling like sharks. They needed my house and they needed it fast. We can't wait until tomorrow, Tanya said. The bank has a deadline, we need to file these papers today. I coughed, a deep rattling cough that I had been practicing in the mirror, and I said, I'm sorry, I'm just so tired. Can you make me some tea first? Mark stood up so fast he nearly knocked over my lamp. I don't have time for tea, sis, we have to act now. And I looked at him with my bald head and my sunken eyes and I said, please, Mark, I just need a few hours, then I'll sign whatever you want. They left. They had no choice. They couldn't drag me to the table and force the pen into my hand. Not yet. They still needed me to be a willing participant, at least on paper. The minute they left, I got to work. I went to my bedroom closet and I pulled out a box of my mother's old things. I had taken the box from her apartment after she died, more out of habit than anything else. She had left everything to Mark, of course. The golden child always got the inheritance, but the box was in my name because I had cleaned out her kitchen. I hadn't even opened it yet, I was too sick. That morning, with the foreclosure notice still sitting on my kitchen counter, I opened the box for the first time. It was full of old recipe cards, church bulletins, and a few pieces of costume jewelry. And at the bottom, wrapped in a dish towel, there was a small leather-bound notebook. It was my mother's diary. I had never known she kept one. I opened it and the first entry was dated 30 years earlier. My mother's handwriting was small and cramped and the pages smelled like stale perfume. I flipped through it slowly. There were entries about her garden, her church, her dogs, and then I got to the last page. The date was 3 days before she died. The handwriting was shaky, the letters pressed hard into the paper. It said, Mark is going to take everything from your sister. Do not trust him, save yourself. I sat on the floor of my bedroom and I read those words 6 times. My mother had known. She had seen what Mark was becoming, what Tanya was turning him into, and she had tried to warn me. The warning was buried in a box of junk that Mark had dismissed as worthless. He had emptied her apartment in a single afternoon, tossing her life into trash bags, but he had missed the one thing that mattered. My mother had foreseen what my brother would do to me, and she had left me a message from the grave, save yourself. That was exactly what I was going to do. I made a decision that day. I would not fight my brother in the open. I would not confront him, not yet. I would play the part of the sick, confused, grateful sister. I would let them think I was too weak to understand my own finances. And while they were busy managing me, I would be busy dismantling them. So I called Tanya and I said, You're right, I need help. I can't do this alone anymore. Can I come stay with you for a while, just until I get my strength back? There was a long pause on the other end of the line and then Tanya said, Of course, sweetie. We'd love to have you. They moved me into their McMansion the next day. I packed a small suitcase, my medications, and my mother's diary, which I hid at the bottom of my bag. Mark carried my suitcase up the stairs to the guest room, and Tanya made a big show of fluffing the pillows and saying, This is your home now, you just rest. The guest room was at the end of the hallway, next to Mark's home office. I noticed immediately that the office door had a keypad lock on it. That was interesting. A home office with a keypad lock. What was he hiding in there? I did not try the door, not that first night. I lay in the guest bed and I listened to the sounds of the house. Mark and Tanya arguing in the kitchen, their voices low but sharp. The words deadline and bank and signature floated up through the floor. Then I heard Tanya say something that made my blood run cold. She said, We can't keep waiting, we need to accelerate the plan. I did not sleep that night. The next morning I woke up early and started exploring. It's amazing what people will let you do when they think you're too sick to be a threat. I wandered around the main floor, touching the granite countertops, looking at the expensive art on the walls, taking mental notes. The kitchen faucet was leaking. The dishwasher had a rust stain. Tanya spent money on appearances but nothing on maintenance. Typical. I found the shredder in the hallway closet. It was a heavy-duty model, the kind you use when you have something to hide. The bin underneath was full of paper confetti. I reached into the bin and pulled out a handful. It was all financial documents. Bank statements, loan applications, tax forms. I shoved a few handfuls into the pocket of my robe and took them back to my room. That evening Tanya made a big show of cooking dinner for us. She was not a cook. She burned the garlic bread and undercooked the chicken. But she smiled and said, "See, we take care of you here, you don't have to worry about anything." I smiled back and said, "Thank you so much, you're both so good to me." And I watched Mark shovel undercooked chicken into his mouth, and I thought about the foreclosure notice on my front door, and I felt nothing at all. The next day, I had a reason to be in the kitchen. Tanya had gone to the gym and Mark was at the catering hall. I was alone in the house for the first time. I went straight to the office door. The keypad lock was a simple 4-digit model. I stared at it for a long time, then I thought about my mother. She had always used the same 4-digit PIN for everything. Her birth year, 1938. I typed in 1-9-3-8. Nothing. I typed in Mark's birth year, 1964. Nothing. I typed in Tanya's birth year, 1970. The lock clicked open. I slipped into the office and closed the door behind me. The room was a mess. Papers everywhere, file folders stacked on the desk, a filing cabinet in the corner with a drawer hanging open. I went to the filing cabinet first. It was full of bank statements, tax returns, business records for the catering hall. And right there, in the top drawer, I found a manila folder labeled Sister. My hands were steady. I opened the folder. Inside were copies of the forged power of attorney, the fake notary stamp, the reverse mortgage application, and a series of bank statements from an account I had never seen. The account was in my name, at a bank I had never used. The statements showed a deposit of $190,000 from the reverse mortgage loan, and then a series of transfers, all within 3 days. $45,000 to a vendor called Gold Coast Linen, $30,000 to Metro Beverage Distributors, $50,000 to a company called Tanya's Design Studio, and on until the account balance was $4.70. That was what my brother had left me, but that was not the worst part. At the bottom of the folder there was another document. It was a promissory note, made out to a lender called Riverside Capital Partners. The note was for $250,000, and my signature was forged at the bottom. The note had a clause that said if the borrower defaulted, the lender could seize all assets, including real property, personal accounts, and any future earnings. I was not just being foreclosed on. I was being set up to take the fall for $250,000 of debt, on top of the reverse mortgage. My brother was not just stealing from me, he was burying me. I took out my phone and photographed everything. Every page, every signature, every account number. Then I put the folder back exactly where I had found it, closed the filing cabinet and reset the keypad lock on my way out. I went back to my room and I sat on the bed and I breathed, in through the nose, out through the mouth. For the first time in months I did not feel sick. I felt clear. I did not confront Mark. Not yet. I needed to know if my mother had left me anything else. I needed to know if she had already set a countermeasure in motion. So I went back to my house alone on the pretense of picking up more clothes, and I searched. I went through her papers, her old files, her safety deposit box, and there, in a manila envelope at the back of her file cabinet, I found it. A letter from a law firm called Harrison and Gates. The letter was addressed to my mother and it said, "Per your instructions, we have placed a restriction on the transfer of the property located at 1842 Sycamore Lane. This restriction requires the physical presence and notarized consent of the property owner, Ms. Carol Bennett, before any lien, mortgage, or transfer of ownership can be recorded. This restriction is permanent and cannot be revoked except by the written instruction of Ms. Carol Bennett herself, verified in person by a representative of Harrison and Gates. Do not trust them, save yourself. My mother had gone to a lawyer 3 days before she died. She had known what Mark was planning, and she had put a dead man's switch on my house. The restriction was still in place. Every document Mark had filed to take out that reverse mortgage was invalid, not just because the notary stamp was fake, but because the transfer required my physical presence at the law firm. I had never been there. The restriction had been flagging every document Mark filed for weeks, But he did not know it because the law firm was not required to notify him. They were only required to block the transfer. The bank had funded the reverse mortgage based on a document that was legally void. The bank just did not know it yet, but the law firm did. Harrison and Gates had a record of every block transfer, every flagged document, every fraudulent signature. I called Harrison and Gates the next day. I got a woman named Miriam on the phone. She was the firm's senior compliance officer. I told her my name and she said, "Ms. Bennett, I've been expecting your call. Your mother was very clear about what to do if you ever reached out. She asked me to come to the office in person. Alone, I did." Miriam was in her 60s, with grey hair pulled back in a bun and glasses on a chain around her neck. She looked like the kind of woman who had never lost a legal argument in her life. She sat across from me at a long conference table, and she said, "Your mother came to us 3 days before she passed. She told us your brother was planning to file fraudulent documents against your property. She did not have proof at that time, only suspicion. So she did what she could do. She placed a restriction on the title. It will hold, but we need to move quickly to unwind the reverse mortgage before the bank tries to seize the property." She paused and looked at me over her glasses. "Do you have proof of the fraud?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the photographs. Every page of the folder labeled sister. The forged signatures, the fake notary stamp, the bank statements showing the $190,000 being drained into Mark's vendors. Miriam looked at the pictures for a long time, then she smiled, not a warm smile, a predator's smile. "This is very good," she said. "This is very, very good." She told me the plan. The law firm would file a motion to void the reverse mortgage on the grounds of fraud and forgery. They would notify the bank, the county clerk, and the title insurance company. They would file a criminal complaint against Mark and Tanya for forgery, fraud, and theft. But first they needed the original documents. Not photographs. Originals, with original signatures and original notary stamps. I needed to get my hands on the manila folder in Mark's home office, the folder labeled sister. I told Miriam I would take care of it. She told me to be careful. I told her careful was my middle name. It took me 2 weeks. 2 weeks of playing the role of the sick, grateful sister. 2 weeks of sleeping in their guest room, eating their undercooked chicken, smiling at their lies. In that time I learned a lot about my brother and his wife. I learned that they were drowning in debt. Not just the $190,000 from my reverse mortgage, but hundreds of thousands more. Credit card debt, loans from predatory lenders, payroll taxes they had never paid. The catering hall was failing, but they kept spending money like it was coming from an endless tap. Tanya bought a new handbag for $400. Mark leased a new Mercedes for $900 a month. They were not cutting back, they were doubling down, because they thought they were about to get a windfall. My house plus the $250,000 promissory note. They thought they were going to come out of this rich. I also learned that my brother had a problem with the IRS. He had been dodging payroll taxes for years, and the IRS had just filed a lien against the catering hall. That was why he needed the $250,000 so desperately. It was not just for the vendors. It was to keep the IRS from seizing the business. He was tunneling under his own collapsing empire, and I was sitting quietly in the guest room taking notes. The accident happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Tanya was in the kitchen trying to use the Instant Pot, and the garbage disposal jammed. Water backed up into the sink and spilled onto the floor. She called her husband, who was not home. She called a plumber, who quoted her $400 just to come out. She stood in the kitchen looking at the dirty water spreading across the tile, and she said, "I don't know what to do." And I said, "Step aside." I had spent 28 years in a hospital cafeteria. I had cleared 1,000 block drains. I had repaired industrial dishwashers, unclogged grease traps, rewired ovens. A garbage disposal was nothing. I opened the cabinet under the sink, found the reset button, grabbed a hex wrench from the tool drawer, and manually cranked the disposal until the jam cleared. Then I flipped the switch and it ran like new. The whole thing took 4 minutes. Tanya stared at me like I had performed a magic trick. "How did you know how to do that?" she asked. And I said, "I used to fix things for a living." It was the first time I had seen her look at me with something other than contempt. It was also the first time she had ever been genuinely afraid of me, though she did not know it yet. The next day, Tanya asked me to help with the bookkeeping for the catering hall. "You're so good with numbers," she said, "and you're so good with fixing things. Maybe you can help us get organized." I said yes. I said it immediately with a grateful smile. They were so desperate to keep me compliant that they were willing to hand me the financial records of their entire fraudulent operation. I helped her sort through receipts and invoices. I helped her organize the filing cabinet. and when she left the room to take a phone call, I helped myself to the folder labeled Sister. I slid it into the waistband of my yoga pants under my oversized sweater, and I walked calmly back to my room. The originals were mine. That night, I made copies of everything, every page. Then I walked out to my car, drove to the nearest FedEx office and shipped the originals to Harrison and Gates via certified mail. I kept digital scans on a USB drive. I mailed a second USB drive to myself at my bungalow. I was building redundancy. I was not going to lose this evidence. The next morning I woke up to the sound of Mark screaming. His voice was so loud it echoed through the walls. I came downstairs and found him in the kitchen, standing over the kitchen island with his phone in his hand. His face was purple. Tanya was standing in the corner crying. "It's gone," she said. "The bank found out the mortgage is void. The IRS just seized the ballroom." Mark threw his phone against the wall, the screen shattered. He turned to me, eyes wild, and said, "What did you do?" And I said, "I didn't do anything, I'm just here." I said it with a face of pure innocence. Inside I was smiling. The medical scare was my test. I needed to know if they had any humanity left. I needed to know if they would help me if I collapsed in front of them, so I staged it. I was in the living room reading, and I waited until Mark and Tanya were both in the room. Then I clutched my chest, gasped, and fell to the floor. I made my body go limp. I did it so well that I scared myself for a second. I was lying on the carpet, eyes half closed, watching through my lashes, and I saw Mark and Tanya freeze. I saw them look at each other, and then I saw Tanya step over my body, reach down and grab the folder off the coffee table, the folder with the records they had been trying to get me to sign. "We can still do this," she said. "We can still get it done before she dies." And Mark said, "Does she even have a pulse?" He said it with such flatness, such total indifference. Like I was a stray animal on the side of the road. And I lay there on the floor of their McMansion, and I realized that my brother would have let me die. He would have watched me die on that carpet and felt nothing at all. That was the moment. I killed the last tiny hope I had ever carried that Mark was still the boy I had grown up with. I waited another 30 seconds, then I coughed, rolled over and sat up. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. "I just got dizzy. I'm fine." Mark helped me to my feet with hands that felt like they were made of wood. "You should rest," he said. "You look terrible." And I said, "You're right, I'll go lie down." I went back to my room and I lay on the bed and I stared at the ceiling. Then I called Miriam and I said, "It's time." The next morning Mark came into my room with another stack of papers. His hands were shaking. "I need you to sign these," he said. "It's the last time, I promise." I looked at the papers. They were documents authorizing a new loan against my house, this time with a reverse mortgage lender called Clearwater Financial. The loan amount was $300,000, and there was a clause that said the borrower would put up all personal property as collateral. I looked at my brother, at the dark circles under his eyes, at the sweat on his upper lip. He was cornered. The IRS had seized his ballroom. The bank had voided his first fraudulent mortgage. He needed me to sign. He needed me to be his scapegoat one last time, and then I dropped the act. "No," I said, and I said it very quietly, just one word. He stared at me like I had slapped him. "What do you mean, no?" he said, his voice cracked. I stood up from the bed. I was still weak, still bald, still in my robe, but I stood up straight. I looked him in the eye. And I said, "I mean no, I will not sign, not today, not ever, not one single paper, not one single word. You have already taken enough from me." His face went through a dozen emotions in 2 seconds. Confusion, then anger, then fear, then something I had never seen in him before. Pure, naked hatred. "You don't understand," he said. "The IRS is going to take everything. The ballroom, the house, the cars, everything. They're going to take my home." He took a step toward me. "This is your fault. You signed the first paper. You let me do this. You have to fix it." And I said, "I have to fix nothing. You forged my signature. You used a fake notary. You drained $190,000 into your failing business. You wrote a $250,000 promissory note in my name. You are not my brother. You are a thief." He lunged at me. He grabbed my arm, and his fingers dug into my skin. And in that moment I did not flinch. I did not scream. I said, "Get your hands off me before the police arrive." And I was not bluffing. The police arrived 6 minutes later. Miriam had been on the phone with the county sheriff's office that morning. She had told them everything: the forged power of attorney, the fake notary stamp, the fraudulent reverse mortgage, the promissory note. The FBI was involved now because mortgage fraud is a federal crime. When the deputies walked in, Mark was still holding the unsigned loan documents. Tanya was in the kitchen shredding papers. They both froze. It was almost funny watching Tanya try to stuff a bank statement into her mouth. She had always been the smarter one. Mark just stood there, papers in his hand, eyes wide as the cuffs went on. I did not stay to watch. I walked out of their McMansion and I drove home. I did not have a wig. I was bald and my skin was grey, and I was the most beautiful I had ever been in my entire life. The investigation took 3 months. It turned out that Mark had been running a larger fraud than I had imagined. He had not just forged my signature. He had forged the signatures of 3 other elderly relatives, all of whom had named him as power of attorney at one point or another. He had taken out predatory loans in their names. He had drained their retirement accounts. He had stolen over $800,000 from his own family, including me. The FBI found the money trail. Most of it had been spent, poured into the black hole of the catering hall and Tanya's shopping habit, but some of it was stashed in an offshore account in the Cayman Islands under the name Tanya's Events LLC. The feds froze the account. They seized the McMansion. They seized the Mercedes. They seized the $470 left in the fraudulent account, and in a plea deal that his lawyer practically begged for, Mark pleaded guilty to 3 counts of wire fraud and 2 counts of aggravated identity theft. He was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. Tanya got 5 years for conspiracy and filing false tax returns. The district attorney's office told me that Tanya had been shredding documents in the kitchen when the police arrived, and one of the pieces of paper she had tried to swallow was the original promissory note. She choked on it. They had to take her to the hospital before they took her to jail. That detail made me laugh for the first time in a year. The reverse mortgage was voided. My house was free and clear again. The title restriction my mother had put in place was permanent. No one could ever take out a loan against my property without my physical presence and notarized consent. The bank that had funded the fraudulent mortgage, Midland Savings and Trust, ended up paying a fine to the state for failing to verify the notary and for not conducting a proper title search. They also paid me a settlement of $67,000 for the distress and the attempted foreclosure. I did not want a cent from them, but my lawyer said I should take it, and for once I listened. And then after all of that I had to decide what to do with myself. I was 60 years old. My body was healing. My hair was growing back soft and silver. I had my home, my pension, my social security. I had one, but I did not want to sit in my bungalow and wait to die. I had spent 28 years in a hospital cafeteria, and I had learned how to feed 1,000 people a day on a shoestring budget. I had learned how to manage inventory, negotiate with vendors, comply with health codes, schedule staff. I had learned how to fix a broken oven and unclog a drain. I was more prepared to run a business than my brother had ever been, and now I had capital. The foreclosure auction for Mark's Grand Ballroom was held on a Thursday. The building was seized by the bank, then by the IRS, then by the county. It was a mess of competing claims, but the long and short of it was that the property was auctioned off for $42,000. I know because I bought it, not the ballroom itself, which was a ruin of broken chairs and unpaid invoices. I bought the commercial kitchen equipment, the industrial ovens, the walk-in freezers, the stand mixers, the proofing cabinets, the stainless steel prep tables. I bought it all for $42,000 using the settlement money from the bank. The auctioneer looked at me like I had lost my mind. A 60-year-old woman in a cardigan buying a bankrupt catering hall's kitchen equipment, but I knew what I was doing. I had spent my whole life in commercial kitchens. I knew exactly what that equipment was worth. I incorporated a business. I called it Leon of Betrayal Catering. My lawyer thought it was too aggressive. My accountant thought it was too weird, but the name was not for them. It was for me, and it was for every person who has ever been stolen from by someone they trusted. Leon of Betrayal Catering serves hospital food, not that sad grey mystery meat they serve in the cafeteria at midnight. Real food, soups and stews and casseroles and fresh bread. I catered her first event at a local church fundraiser, then a school board dinner, then a corporate retreat. I used my mother's recipes, the ones from the box that Mark had thrown away. I baked her coffee cake for every event, and people would ask for the recipe, and I would tell them it was a family secret. Within a year, Leon of Betrayal Catering was profitable. Within 2 years, I had 6 employees. I was not rich, but I was mine. That was enough. And Mark is still in federal prison. I know because I send him a Christmas card every year. Nothing personal, just a photo of the Leon of Betrayal Catering logo, printed on thick cardstock. The logo is a set of forged initials crossed out. Every invoice my company prints has a line at the bottom. Paid in full, no liens, no fraud. It is a small thing, a petty thing maybe, but it is also a legal thing. The business name was registered, the logo was trademarked, and the invoice footer was a deliberate reference to a public court document. The fraud docket number. Every single person who pays me sees that number. They see the initials crossed out. They see the words no liens, no fraud, and they know exactly what kind of business they are dealing with. I visit Mark sometimes, not often, maybe once a year. He sits across from me in the visiting room, wearing a beige jumpsuit, his face sallow and tired. He does not look like my brother anymore. He looks like a man who has been hollowed out by his own choices. He asks me for money. I tell him no. He asks me to forgive him. I tell him forgiveness is not a loan. He asks me how the business is going. I tell him the truth. I tell him Leon of Betrayal Catering just signed a contract to cater the annual banquet for the State Bar Association. I tell him the kitchen staff now includes a certified pastry chef, and I tell him that we are thinking about opening a second location. His face goes tight and he says, I always knew you would do something like this. And I say, you didn't know anything, you never did. Then I get up and I leave. I drive home in my used Toyota and I park in the driveway of my paid-off bungalow and I walk through the front door and I stand in the kitchen and I feel the quiet. I feel the safety. I feel the thing my mother was trying to give me. And I am grateful. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? If you believe that competence is the best revenge and that family who steals from you is not family at all, hit like and subscribe to this channel. We tell stories about people who were pushed to the edge and decided to push back. And if you have a story of your own that you think belongs on this channel, leave a comment below. We read every single one. I'm your host and I'll see you in the next story.